So my name is Maria Korolchuk. I'm the vice president of an NGO called Malva, that is a Romanian NGO that is women-led, Ukrainian women-led, based in Bucharest. And I have been helping with the Ukrainian crisis response for the past 2 years. I have become a vice president recently. Before that, I worked for various international and local NGOs as well in the Ukrainian crisis response in Romania.
Maria, thank you for taking time to talk with us today. Tell us about your work. You have been very busy since you, like so many other folks, had to leave Ukraine because of the war and relocate. But you've been very busy working in your own way in the war effort. So give us a sense of what it is that you've been up to.
So indeed, before the war, I was a CEO of a few companies back in Ukraine, and I was actually into logistics, and I was doing import and export of cargo and customs clearance. And I was used to be my own boss and, have a stable life. But when the war hit, and the port being a strategic place, that is the first thing that closed down. So I was out of work very quickly. I'm over 30. In Ukraine, that's considered very old to start a new career. And with 3 children, I had to move for safety, for their safety. And it has been a chaos ever since, if I could say so, especially the first few months. The border was crazy, and I was lucky enough to have the skill set to help a few international NGOs with the translation, in a way, a fixer, if you can call it that. And due to the fact that I needed the money to raise my children because my income was zero at that moment and no life savings because I had a life planned ahead, I was up for any job, even if it included going to more of the hotspots. Like I was never in the actual hotspot, like our soldiers in Ukraine call it hotspots, but I was in those areas that were just after some war activity or after occupation. And I agreed to do that, even though I had 3 children that were based in another country with some people I barely knew in a way, but that was a way for me to earn my income. And since then, I think I have tried everything there is in the Ukrainian crisis response, starting from an interpreter for medical institutions and for being a fixer for some NGOs to contact them with the regional state departments that are in Ukraine, the state powers, if you may. And I have been also project coordinator and project managers for other local NGOs to help integrate Ukrainians in Romania, because actually we were very unprepared to integrate. Like these people were completely lost. And it was an emergency response. So the problem with it is that no people were actually educated to integrate 2 years into the war, the full-scale invasion, though many with whom I work are twice displaced. And they keep correcting me, saying that actually the war has been going on for 10 years. It's only for the vast majority of Ukrainians that it's been going on only for 2 years.
Right. You have been very busy, and you have a daunting task ahead of you. But recently you were involved in something that I think a lot of people view as an opportunity to catapult your work to help Ukraine and Ukrainians to the next level. And it was something called Tech Camp. And I'm interested in, if you would, share some of your thoughts about your experience there.
Of course, indeed, it was a great, I would say, a surreal experience. So what many people don't understand, or maybe they're not willing to understand, is that 2 years into the full-scale invasion, people have got a fatigue from Ukrainian war. It's no longer in the headlines, and we have to find more unconventional methods to actually draw attention back to the fact that, there are still war actions going on and Ukraine is still under attack. And Tech Camp was this wonderful place. It was a wonderful event that was organized, and it drew professionals from all around Europe that were actually Ukrainian citizens who were working in the Ukrainian crisis response to hear their opinions and to give them necessary tools to highlight what is going on and the fact that the war is still going on, and to do it through non-traditional methods. In our case, what they were teaching us at Tech Camp was storytelling using modern technological tools. And I just think it's fascinating because I'm a true believer that storytelling is something that we all can relate to. We all grew up on stories. Stories are the things that make us remember certain points. When we read newspapers, it is so impersonal. While stories, they tell the real thing and they make you connect with emotions. And this is what was happening at TechCap. Through all these different workshops, we as professionals were taught even more modern and new methods how to draw attention to what we're doing best. Because frankly speaking, it is so difficult now to get funding for different projects to help Ukrainians around the world and both in Ukraine. So this was like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah, that's excellent. What is it that you, as a result of your experience at Tech Camp, would like to do moving forward through that system?
Well, here I would like to say the following, that even though after the beginning of the war, my mindset changed and I started to believe that no borders can contain a person. But at Tech Camp, I felt this even more because it involved so much networking. You meet people with whom you can speak clearly. You don't have to explain to them what we're doing. They already know everything. So everybody clicked and connected, and all these projects that now there's an open call. And actually, I'm sure that many people are going to apply like with a regional response, with a regional project, because we feel that we can do so much more together than by ourselves as individuals. So what Tech Camp did was make us all network, believe that there are no borders, at least in Europe, because that's where most of us are now residing. And we can make so many great things together and be strong together. I think that was the main thing. It was this empowerment. We didn't even know that we needed this inspiration empowering until we were gathered there. So the next step would be writing different projects. And, you know, these projects will actually benefit a lot of people. Like this is an opportunity to help a huge amount of people that have nowhere to return to. As you know, many Ukrainians are returning back to Ukraine due to different reasons. But there is a fragment, like a segment of people that their lives are completely destroyed back in Ukraine. They have no homes to return to, like physically, no homes, no roof over their heads. So they will try to integrate in Europe, and these projects that Tech Camp um, help to see from a different angle, they can help these people.
One of the things that was made clear to me in my research into Tech Camp is that um, disinformation is a key problem. And one of the key things they wanted to do was to help you develop tools to essentially fight back against disinformation. What did you get from that?
Indeed, disinformation is something that fuels so many misunderstandings. Um, what I realize at these events, these gatherings, and Tech Camp was one of them, is that we actually don't know what's going on in another country, right? Sometimes Ukrainians from Ukraine don't understand what Ukrainians out of Ukraine are doing. And this is all grounds to disinformation, to propaganda that is used by the Russians even to spread more disinformation and to fragment Ukraine even more instead of uniting us, right? So the easiest way in a way to battle it is something that is just in front of our noses. It's social media, it's making visuals, it's telling stories through such simple methods like social platforms. So what we were all, as participants at Tech Camp, thrilled was we were all given this equipment. So it was tablets, it was tripods, microphones, and we were explained how simple it is for our voices to be heard and reached around the world. It doesn't even have to be regional. It should be reached in Ukraine. So Ukrainians in Ukraine should know what's going on outside of Ukraine, right? It can be reached, like it has, social media has no borders. And this is such a powerful tool to use and yet so simple that I don't understand how it hasn't been used more during these 2 years. So we were completely thrilled to be given this equipment, to be taught how to use it. And now I know that a lot of us, the participants, are having challenges that we're trying to film something really nice and we're exchanging opinions to see if, it will reach our target audience, to see if we would like the images and the visuals. So yes, like a power of empowering, we're just so thrilled that sometimes the answers are just on the surface. You just need some help, maybe some mentorship to see them.
Good. Good luck to you and your colleagues as you endeavor to do that. You are involved in some other things, and there are some very important developments that are going on in Ukraine as far as children go. We know that a lot of children have simply disappeared from Ukraine.
Yes,
And
it's true.
my understanding, you've been involved in a project to bring, to shed some light on what's going on with that. What can you share about that project with us?
So since recently, I have been working with one Japanese specialist. He's a representative from NHK Broadcasting and former to hiring me to help him work with a story, including, let's say, athletes and wrestlers, and the fact that some Russian athletes and Belarusian athletes were allowed to participate in qualifying for the Olympics. He actually was involved in a documentary. He filmed a documentary regarding how there is an organization, an NGO in Ukraine called Save Ukraine, that main mission is to return kids from the occupied territories that are now occupied in Ukraine, to return kids that were kidnapped to Russia, and also to help relocate children that are in dangerous zones in Ukraine to a safer place. So far, this organization has succeeded in bringing back 264 children, Ukrainian children, to safety. It's a very complex process because when I saw the end footage, it touched me so much. You cannot even imagine how difficult it is to watch from the beginning to the end, the amount of emotions that it brings out of you. Because even though we're all different around the world, but children is something we all understand. And when you see the raw emotions of the parents whose kids have been kidnapped and they have no contact with them, or even worse, if they find contact and the child has been so brainwashed by the propaganda and saying, I will not return back to Ukraine because, and giving the reasons, what you feel at this moment is inexplicable. So this NGO is using different donations and has different partners in its team. They have volunteers, they have former soldiers um, who help identify kids that are missing and to bring them back. And sometimes the bringing back journey is so difficult. So even when this NGO finds the kids in Russia, for example, next stage is to set communication with official channels from the Russian Federation to actually prove that this child has parents and has a place to return to, for example. And after a huge amount of different checks, the mothers are allowed to come to Russia, but through a very difficult logistical route involving Belarus, involving then after Belarus, they're sent to another point in another town in Belarus where they're once more checked. Later, they have flights to Moscow, and all the mothers don't fly on a single plane. They fly through different flights. In Moscow, they're undergoing some other checks with their organs. After that, they have two more checkpoints, and only then, so it's like a whole circle around of Ukraine with a lot of checkpoints. Their mothers are actually allowed to meet with the children and take them back. And sadly, what this documentary showed that my colleague did was that sometimes the mothers don't make it. For example, there was one grandmother who died at the very last checkpoint, and that was the last living relative of the one that could be a guardian of this girl. And this influenced the decision of the girl later not to return back to Ukraine. First of all, she had no legal guardian to return to. She only had minor brother. And I don't even know what to add here. So after going through such hell and finding the child, going through all these checkpoints, through all this interrogation, this person dies and cannot even meet her grandchild. And this is the reality that are facing many Ukrainians today.
This is so horrible on so many different levels. You know, as somebody who's been covering the conflict, or forgive me, the war in Ukraine since 2014. And, you know, even Russian aggression before that, it's tragic on so many levels to see just how widespread and how, I guess, insidious Russia's efforts have been to tear apart Ukraine, to tear apart the culture, to tear apart, you know, the cultural sites and the history and even people very clearly, because tens of thousands have died over time since this latest stage of the war started. We're not even talking about what took place 10 years before. But people like you are the reason why I think this is Ukraine's not giving up. And I saw the emotion on your face when you were talking about this situation with the children, and it's important, and that you shared that. And thank you for doing that. What do you think? Well, first, let me ask: do you have an idea of how many children might have been kidnapped totally?
I do not have any idea, and I can tell you even more. Ukrainians are wondering how many deaths actually of civilians there are in Ukraine, but you may know, I mean, I know that you know that it's a state secret. Like I know that the Ukrainian government will never disclose until the end of the war such numbers. I think they're very horrific. But for you just to have an example, right? So many children who were kidnapped, um, they were kidnapped through occupied territory. So when Russia invaded Ukraine, they snatched more than 20% of the territory. And many of the Ukrainians in the Kherson region, so that's the southern part of Ukraine, were also, tired of all this constant war action and the loud sounds and everything. So when the Russian representatives approached these parents and said, look, we can bring your kids to safety, let them go to a camp in Russia, in Crimea, for the kids to rest away from the war action, where they will not be affected, where they'll be safe. Personally, I don't understand how many of these parents said yes. But then again, I was never under such circumstances. I didn't live under occupation when anything could happen. So in a way, I realized that maybe every third, fourth parent would, if they felt hopelessness, they would let their children be taken to these camps if they were promised safety. And considering that over 20% of the territory was occupied straight away, so we can just imagine the numbers of the children that were kidnapped. And let's not even go into the details of how many children were actually killed during this war, because the targets, as we all know, are not only military objects, but just civilian residential buildings. And we only know what's on the surface, but we don't know what's actually going on. Because from what I have been talking to people who remained in Ukraine, especially men, they told me that sometimes after some hits from the missiles or from the drops or from the remains from the drones that were shot down that actually went into the residential buildings. So the official numbers would say 5 were injured or there were few casualties, but what they saw in person, it was so much more. But we know why the state doesn't want to actually publish some numbers. We will find out everything when everything ends.
What part of Ukraine are you from originally?
From the southern part, I'm from Odessa.
What do you think of what took place last week when President Zelensky and the Greek Prime Minister were there when that attack took place? Do you think or feel that that was an attempt to kill the Prime Minister and the President? Or was it, as Russia said, an attack on a building, a warehouse, or something like that? What do you think happened?
I'm a specialist in psychological warfare initially, and I think that Russian intelligence, however we may portray it, like there is a lot of jokes going around that Russians are not as smart as Ukrainians, that they're stupid. But I don't think so. I think their intelligence is working as well as Ukrainian is, because we are all human beings, we're all smart. So many things are done to rattle. Maybe it wasn't a direct attempt to do something, but it also has a rattling effect. You know, you can find context in everything later after the event happens, but I don't think there are any coincidences at this matter. And I do not personally believe that when I read news that, oh, it was just an empty building, it was just a warehouse, there was nothing there, oh, the stupid Russians, like, why did they do that?
Yeah.
Call me a skeptic. I don't believe it.
No, no, it's you have a perfect right to feel and believe that way, and I think we can learn a lot from you. Let's talk a little bit more about your project you're working on with the producer, and then we can move on to a couple of other areas before our time runs out. Um, where's the project, the documentary project stand right now?
Okay, so before hiring me, the producer did a few documentaries in Ukraine. He was based for 20 months actually in Ukraine. He didn't live the territory. So he has seen a lot. I only joined him recently and I hope to continue with working with him on future projects. But I was hired to help him with the translation and doing interviews of Ukrainian wrestlers that are qualifying for the Olympics, upcoming Olympics in Paris. And actually, I was asked if I could also interview Russian and Belarus athletes, because a lot of Ukrainians have a principal position not to deal with the representatives of the aggressive parties. I knew that I was going to be asked this question because in the job proposal, it was said Russian Ukrainian interpreter. And of course, you would have to wonder after hearing that some athletes were allowed to participate within neutral independent status in a way, right? But we all know who they're representing, which country they're representing. And call me curious in a way. I'm an analyst. I would like to hear the story from different points of views. I agreed to this job. I'm treating it like a professional because actually I have been dealing with lots of Russian representatives in Romania. So these are people who, even though they lived in Ukraine for 20 years, for example, or 10 years, they had a residency permit, but they never wanted to change their passport to a Ukrainian one. And I already overcame my initial shock when I first confronted face to face after the full scale invasion with a Russian representative. Here in this documentary, sometimes it gets a bit, no, I cannot say that it gets very emotional. Yes, I would like and I want, and I always want the Ukrainian wrestlers to beat Russian wrestlers when they're during a match together, when they're doing their sparrings. But when I'm looking at the matches, when I'm looking at the mats where so many countries are battling, I'm seeing pure politics because people are saying that sport is out of politics. But here I see that the head coach of the Russian Federation is actually a Georgian, which is a very interesting fact considering the 2008, right? The year 2008. So a
Yeah.
Georgian is coaching a Russian Federation team and they're having their camp in an annexed territorium in Georgia that was annexed by Russia in Ossetia. And then you see Russians that have joined other teams and they're now representing other teams. So call me two-faced, but I do not see how sports and politics are not intermatched. And why are these documentaries interesting? Because once more, let's return back to the fatigue. People don't want to read newspapers. They don't want to see tragic images, but they want to have their attention drawn through unconventional methods, right? And by having documentaries when combining food, beautiful food, for example, that was one of the documentaries that this Japanese producer did for the Japanese audience who loves different cuisine. But then later, this food, this image of food, was shown in a context that this was actually meals prepared for the Ukrainian soldiers that are battling on the front lines. And wham, like you have a context, right? So yes, it's wonderful food. I liked what I see, but actually this is food for soldiers. Oh, soldiers have to eat. What are the logistics? So it gets people to think. Same with the sports, because everybody loves sport, everybody loves music. We have to find these moments, how to attract people's attention about what's going on, and to say that many narratives are actually false. They're not working. And if we continue thinking the same way we did 10, 20 years ago, we're not going to get anywhere. We have to be these myth busters, if you wish, to show what's actually going on.
Thanks, Maria, for that detailed explanation. We're running out of time, and I appreciate you staying over a little bit extra to talk here. But let me ask you this question. How are you doing? And just give us a sense of, I know this has been a very difficult time for you and all of your Ukrainian brothers and sisters. So give us a sense of what's next for you as this all continues.
So I cannot say I'm doing that great in a context that I'm burnt out, as many of my colleagues are working in the NGO sphere. But I see hope. I see how people are changing. So we have now a huge group of people. Most of them are women, because if you could see that the refugees who left, vast majority were women, who are now determined to move on with their life, to contribute in any way they can to their country, but to stop pausing their life. They're unfreezing and they're moving on. And when you have people who actually want to change, to make this change becomes more possible. It's no longer are you knocking at a door that will not budge. And I believe that actually, even though it's very difficult times right now, but we can help so many people. And finally, an NGO worker like me, we have a purpose and a cause, because the women have decided that they're doing something and we can help them to do it. So amidst all this darkness, there is a small sliver of hope. And I hope that, oh, see, this is just me saying hope, 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 but this is what we're all feeling. We hope that things are going to get better.
Well, hope is correct. Thank you very much, and Slava Ukraine.
Героям слава.
Thank you, Maria Korolchuk, for your time today, and we'll stay in touch. We'll keep up with you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for having me.